Hi, I'm Arvind Singhal, and I welcome you to Just Legends, a series that profiles legendary individuals whose work has inspired the creation of a more just and humane world. Today, we profile the work of Stanford University professor of psychology, Al Bandura, who conducted the famous Bobodol experiments in the 1960s, giving us the gift of social learning and social cognitive theory. Al Bandura, probably the most famous, prominent, and influential psychologist alive, and had the most illustrious career at Stanford University. Our paths have crossed many times, and it's hard to find a mind as sharp as Al's. Here we have Al Bandura reflecting on the famous Bobodol experiment and also the legacy that it has had with respect to spawning and influencing the field of entertainment, education, and social change. Al Bandura in his own words.
The segment you're about to see is taken from an early experiment on learning of aggressive styles of behavior through modeling. Children watched a filmed adult perform novel aggressive acts toward a inflated doll, and the physical aggression was accompanied by novel hostile remarks. We later measured how much of this modeled aggression the children had learned just by watching. The model pummeled the doll with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down, and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The room contained varied play materials, and children could choose to play aggressively or non-aggressively. The children devised new ways of hitting the doll. Now, the object of interest was the novel aggressive acts, not punching the doll. And children in the control group who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling never exhibited the novel forms of aggression. And here's a creative embellishment. A doll becomes a weapon of assault.
I'm Arvind Singhal, and Al, first, it's a great honor to be sitting next to you in this two-day meeting. I've admired your work and greatly influenced by it. And I was wondering if for our students and for our colleagues, if you tell us a little bit about the days of the Bobodol experiment. What led you to do the Bobodol experiment, and what influence it has had in your work?
It's become my legacy. Virtually every student takes introductory psychology.
That's right.
And all the books have pictures of the Bobodol.
Yeah.
So the Bobodol follows me wherever I go. And I was checking into a hotel, and the clerk looked down at the registration and said, "Bandura, didn't you do the Bobodol experiment?" And I said, "I'm afraid that's going to be my legacy." He said, "Hell, that deserves an upgrade. I'll give you a suite in the hotel." I'm checking through the Vancouver customs, and the custom agent looks at the passport and said, "Bandura, you're the one who did the Bobodol." She was a psych major at UBC. So this thing follows me wherever I go. It's interesting because there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, even among colleagues and in the textbooks. See, I was doing research studying the families of hyperaggressive adolescents. How do kids who are living in intact homes, they're bright kids living in intact homes in the plush neighborhoods, why do they become aggressive? And it turns out they have very aggressive fathers. Namely, they modeled very aggressive attitudes. They didn't want their kid being pushed around. I was doing this research when behaviorism had a stranglehold on psychology.
Right.
And according to that theory, the only way you learn is by trial and error and punishing and rewarding consequences. I couldn't imagine how a culture could ever function if you had to instill the entire set of competencies at this individual level through trial and error.
Through direct experience, no?
Through direct experience.
Yeah.
And this is where I became very much interested in the power of example as a mode of learning. And after this field study, I decided it should be possible to study this experimentally. And at this point, I was really using aggression, not because at this point that I was particularly interested in aggression. I was interested in the mechanisms of learning by observation. And the modeling experiments worked beautifully. Now, so in a way, it's kind of interesting because my global applications, I often refer to them as Bobo Gone Global.
That's right.
Bobo Gone, where my colleagues who comment on the Bobo doll experiment don't understand the purpose of that experiment. You see, there are 4 media effects of exposure to violence. One, you learn aggressive styles of behavior, and it's a damn good tutor. Secondly, it can reduce restraints over aggression that you've learned from other sources, and that's the disinhibitory effect. And third, it can desensitize and habituate people to violence. And fourth, it can shape images of reality. Each of these methods needs a different methodology. So for learning effects, you see the critic would be, we didn't use a human target. For learning effects, you would never use a human target. It would be as nonsensical as requiring a test of whether bombardiers have learned how to bomb by having them bomb San Francisco or New York. You use similar targets. For disinhibitory effects, that's where you want to see whether they're now going to be acting on what they've learned to use. For habituation effect, you expose them to violence, and then you see whether or not they are concerned, the amount of physiological arousal, and so on. And then for the media as shaper of reality, then you kind of do the things that Gerbner was doing, namely, people have high exposure, they see themselves more likely a victim of violence, do they see the environment as much more dangerous, and so on. So when I read these textbooks saying, well, the criticism of the Bobo doll experiment is, they didn't use human targets. Of course, it would be nonsensical to study learning by setting up a target where people won't want to show you what they learned. Now I want to understand the mechanisms of observation learning. There's the attentional processes, what determines what they look at, what they extract from it. There's the representational processes, because the modeling is gone, but there's some representation left. And then there's the translation production process, and then the motivational processes. So these were the four sub-processes that govern observational learning. Now, the striking thing about the Bobo doll experiments, those experiments were done 45 years ago. One Saturday, I get a call from Mexico City in which she says, I'm Miguel Speedo. I read your Bobo doll experiments. I extracted about 6 principles from your research, and I decided that I could use this knowledge to create serial dramas to produce social change. could I come down and show you my videotapes? My first reaction is, well, this is going to be one of these, I'm going to use the media for a quick fix. And there are no quick fixes in changing human behavior. So Miguel shows up with his videos. These are really powerful. And I'm looking at this and I said, good God, this is the Michelangelo of translation. Because I was arguing that if you want to produce society-wide changes, you need three models. You need a damn good theory that will give you the guidelines for how to structure change programs. Secondly, you need a creative person who can translate theory into engrossing dramas. Psychology is pretty lousy at that. It requires different types of expertise. So I looked at this in Miguel, and I suddenly realized that this is a remarkable translational model that he extracted from those lowly bubble doll studies. And so over time, I suddenly realized that Miguel, I provide the theory, Miguel provided the translation. We don't have the resources or the expertise for social diffusion, which is the third element. And that's where Poindexter heard about this methodology and concluded, to hell with my population program, I'm going to adopt this as my major thrust for dealing with soaring population growth. And they became the diffusion mechanism. And so what we had here is a melding of the three elements that are necessary for effecting society-wide change. Good theory, creative translation, and effective social diffusion.
And here we are, over 45 years later, and
still not burned.
thanks, Anne.